there, and he had just won rap album, you know. He got up there and he was his usual fairly, confident self and said, "I own this."
At 68, country legend Vince Gill just named the 7 artists he hates most, and the list is explosive. After decades of smiles, he's calling out the fakes, the rude, and the ones who crossed the line. Join us as we unveil the 7 artists Vince Gill hated the most. Vince Gill and country music. The iconic country singer Vince Gill is known for his gentle voice and kind heart, but somehow one would not expect such a bold confession from him about these artists. Although behind his fame and success lies a long life and career journey, one built through struggle, heartbreak, and triumph. Before diving into his surprising list, it's important to understand how Gill rose from small-town beginnings to become one of country music's most respected legends. His early life and career hold the key to why certain names left such a bitter mark and hatred on him. His story begins long before the spotlight found him. Vincent Gill was born on April 12, 1957, in Norman, Oklahoma. He grew up in a musical family. His father was a judge who also played the guitar and banjo, and his mother sang and played the harmonica. From a young age, Vince showed a love for music. When he was only 5 years old, he learned to play Old Shep on his grandmother's guitar. By the time he was a teenager, he had taught himself how to play several instruments, including the dobro, fiddle, banjo, mandolin, and bass guitar. In high school, Vince started a bluegrass band called Mountain Smoke. In 1976, the band opened for the rock group Kiss. After the band broke up, Vince joined other bluegrass bands and eventually moved to Los Angeles, where he played in a group called Sundance. In 1978, Vince got his first big break when he became the lead singer and guitarist for the soft rock band Pure Prairie League. He sang their hit song Let Me Love You Tonight, which became a top 10 hit. He also wrote several songs for the band during his time with them. But after a few years, Vince left the group and moved to Nashville to chase a solo career.
It doesn't matter that I don't care that they're not moved by the same things I am.
At first, his solo career was slow to take off. He signed with RCA Records in 1984 but didn't find much success. That changed in 1989 when he joined MCA Nashville. His breakthrough came in 1990 with the album When I Call Your Name. From there, his career exploded. Between 1992 and 1994, Vince had 4 #1 solo hits: I Still Believe in You, Don't Let Our Love Start Slipping Away, One More Last Chance, and Trying to Get Over You. He also sang on Reba McEntire's hit The Heart Won't Lie. His album I Still Believe in You went quintuple platinum, that's 5, and became his biggest-selling record. Vince Gill's music blended heartfelt ballads with upbeat songs, winning over fans. He won 22 Grammy Awards and earned 65 spots on the Billboard country charts. His guitar skills, smooth tenor voice, and honest lyrics made him one of country music's most respected artists. There's no doubt that he was shaped by humble beginnings and pure musical talent, something that has given the world decades of unforgettable songs and stories, both on stage and off. Well, you'd be shocked to know the first name on the list, which is particularly linked to his background and rise to fame. Number 1, Pure Prairie League.
Oh my goodness, that's a great question, because you would probably get just a handful of...
In the early 1970s, Vince Gill joined Pure Prairie League, a country rock band known for its smooth harmonies and authentic sound. At that time, the group stood for something real, music that blended heartfelt lyrics with honest melodies. Vince's talent helped shape that sound, and in return, the band helped launch his career. But what started as a promising journey turned sour in his eyes. Vince didn't just leave the band, he left with a broken heart. Years later, he didn't hold back his feelings about them when speaking on this matter. By the time I left, they were Pure Prairie League in name only, he said. That wasn't just a passing remark. It was a loaded message from someone who watched a band lose its identity. Most people who have watched the band evolve over the years agreed. After Vince's departure, the band's later albums were called unrecognizable. The sound had changed completely. The soul, the heart, the roots, it was all gone. For Vince, that was unforgivable. He believed in preserving the spirit of country music. Watching a band he once poured his soul into become something hollow felt like a betrayal. Some say Vince left quietly, but insiders knew it wasn't without pain. His decision to join Rodney Crowell's Cherry Bombs marked more than just a career move. It was a fresh start, a way to get back to music that mattered, and he never looked back. To Vince, music isn't about trends or names, it's about truth. When that truth is lost, even a familiar name becomes meaningless. Pure Prairie League may have kept their title, but to Vince Gill, they had thrown away their soul. And Vince? He walked away, not out of ego, but because he couldn't stand to watch something pure become a shell of what it once was. This brings us to the next on the list. Number 2, Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean stormed into country music with a loud, bold sound that was impossible to ignore. Known for his baseball caps, heavy guitar riffs, and lyrics filled with trucks, whiskey, and tailgate parties, Aldean quickly won over a massive crowd. His music was made for big crowds and good times, with anthems that blasted through speakers at festivals and bars. His fan base grew fast, and his name became one of the biggest in modern country music. But while many loved his style, Vince Gill, the country music legend, known for his deep respect for traditional storytelling and musical craft, wasn't impressed at all. Vince Gill has always been a fan of real songwriting. To him, country music is about stories that touch the heart, about pain, hope, and truth, crafted with skill and soul. Aldean's music, with its loud production and party-ready vibes, felt like a different world altogether. Vince once told Rolling Stone magazine, "I think we've dumbed it down. There's room for fun in music, but let's not pretend it's country just because there's a pickup truck in the video." That line wasn't just a casual opinion, it was a clear message. Vince was calling out a whole wave of bro country artists, Aldean at the front for focusing on flashy images and catchy but shallow lyrics instead of meaningful songs. Aldean's rise marked a big shift in country music. The style moved away from the deep, honest storytelling Vince loved, and towards something louder and more about lifestyle marketing, think trucks, beers, and parties rather than real lived experience. Vince saw this as a loss, a moment when country music started chasing trends instead of staying true to its roots. For him, Aldean's music was less about soul and more about spectacle, and that was a hard pill to swallow. The man who had spent decades perfecting his craft and honoring the traditions of country music couldn't get behind a sound that felt so far removed from that. Despite both being big names, Vince Gill and Jason Aldean never shared much in public. They appeared at the same festivals sometimes, but never shared a stage, never collaborated, never even appeared in the same spotlight. The reports from insiders suggest that Vince quietly refused to present awards or attend events where Aldean was the headline act. It wasn't about jealousy or ego. For Vince, it was about protecting what country music means to him. He couldn't bring himself to support a style that seemed to ignore everything he stood for. The gap between them wasn't just about music style, it was a clash of values. Where Vince built his career on respect for craftsmanship, narrative, and emotion, Aldean's success came from high-energy performances, catchy hooks, and appealing to a crowd ready to party. Aldean's music was made for stadiums and bright lights, while Vince's was built for quiet moments and deep connection. It's like they were playing two different games under the same genre name, and that made it hard for Vince to see Aldean as part of the country music family he loved. Still, the story of Vince Gill's dislike of Jason Aldean isn't just about music. It's about how a genre changes over time, and how not everyone agrees on what those changes mean. And while Aldean made millions and played to packed arenas, Vince stayed true to his idea of what country music should be: honest, soulful, and crafted with care. You could say Vince's quiet protest was like a last stand for the old guard, a way to remind fans that country music is more than just a good party song. And for Vince, that meant refusing to give his stamp of approval to a trend that, to him, felt like a flashy distraction. Jason Aldean may have changed country music forever, but Vince Gill's refusal to embrace that change shows there's still a conflict over what the heart of country is. And for fans of deep, meaningful songs, Vince's stand is a reminder that sometimes the loudest voices aren't the ones you should follow. Number 3, Kris Kristofferson.
Once again, a great testament. Would you call this guy a great singer? Not necessarily.
Kris Kristofferson is one of country music's most legendary figures. With unforgettable songs like Sunday Morning Comin' Down, Me and Bobby McGee, and Help Me Make It Through the Night, he carved his name into the heart of American music. Fans adored his raw emotion, his poetic lyrics, and the way he brought real life into every line he sang. But not everyone was sold on his charm. Vince Gill, in particular, wasn't cool with his style. Vince named Kristofferson on his list of 7 artists he hated the most, and that raised more than a few eyebrows. It wasn't just a passing dislike. Gill's frustration with Kristofferson ran deep. Vince had always held tight to ideas of perfection, control, and hard-earned skill. He believed in flawless pitch, careful songwriting, and polished performances. In his eyes, music was a craft to be studied and mastered. But Kristofferson represented the opposite. He was a walking storm, messy, unpredictable, and yet still worshipped by fans. That drove Vince crazy. What truly bothered Gill wasn't just Kristofferson's rough sound. It was the praise that followed him. Writers and listeners called Chris authentic, gritty, and real. They saw beauty in his broken edges. But for Vince, that kind of praise felt like a slap in the face to artists who spent their lives chasing excellence. According to someone close to Gill, he once said, "It's not deep, it's just sloppy. We lowered the bar and called it genius." That comment, harsh as it was, revealed just how strongly he felt. Their careers never crossed paths in meaningful ways. There were no duets, no tribute shows, no backstage photos. Even when Vince hosted events that honored Kristofferson's peers, Chris was always the missing name. It was as if Vince refused to pretend, even silently, that he admired the man. Some called it stubbornness, others called it honesty. People who worked in Nashville often whispered about the tension. One story made the rounds for years. During a rehearsal for a big country award show, Kristofferson was scheduled to perform. Vince, who was supposed to stick around, reportedly left early. As he walked out, he muttered something about not wanting to watch another train wreck. It was never proven. But in country music circles, a good story doesn't need confirmation, it just needs ears. To fans of Kristofferson, Vince's opinion may sound harsh, but to Gill, it was never personal. It was about what music should be. He didn't hate the man, he hated what he stood for. To Vince, Chris had skipped the grind, walked into the spotlight, and got rewarded for being a beautiful mess. And that made it hard to pretend everything was fine. When Vince finally opened up and listed Kristofferson among the artists he couldn't stand, he wasn't trying to stir up trouble. It came from years of quiet frustration. For Gill, music meant control, balance, and care. Kristofferson, in his view, had tossed all that aside and still ended up a hero. In the end, it wasn't about grudges. It was about two men who saw the same world in opposite ways, one chasing perfection, the other embracing chaos. And for Vince Gill, that difference was just too big to ignore. Next, number 4, Shania Twain. Shania Twain was once called the Queen of Country Pop. Her name meant glamour, huge success, and songs that topped charts around the world. With smash hits like Man, I Feel Like a Woman, That Don't Impress Me Much, and You're Still the One, she turned country music into something the pop world could love. Her music crossed lines, filled stadiums, and redefined the genre for a new generation. But not everyone celebrated that change. While fans danced to her catchy tunes, Vince Gill stood back, silent but uneasy. To him, Shania wasn't saving country music. She was slowly turning it into something he barely recognized. Vince Gill never came out and named Shania Twain directly, but his words, carefully chosen and quietly delivered, told their own story. He once said, "We lost a generation of real country fans chasing radio hits." Another time, he remarked, "Sometimes we forget what genre we're in." These weren't just passing thoughts. They sounded like quiet warnings, especially when placed next to Shania's rise. Her songs had pop hooks, flashy videos, and production, everything Vince believed country music didn't need. To Vince, music was about roots, not radio charts. He built his career on honest songs, simple melodies, and a deep respect for tradition. He played instruments with care, wrote songs from the heart, and stayed close to the old ways of Nashville. So when Shania arrived, looking more like a pop star than a country singer and filling her albums with pop sounds, Vince saw something he couldn't support. She became a symbol of a shift that worried him deeply. What bothered Vince most wasn't just her success, but what followed. After Shania's breakthrough, other artists rushed to copy her formula. They chased chart success with shiny, overproduced songs. Record labels started picking artists who looked good on TV, not who could write songs that lasted. Vince watched as the soul of country music began to fade. Where once there were heartfelt ballads and stories of small towns and heartbreak, now there were music videos with fireworks, fancy outfits, and pop beats. Fans of classic country started to feel pushed out. The music they loved was being replaced. Vince spoke up, not with anger but with quiet concern. He never said her name. He didn't have to. Everyone in Nashville knew who had opened the door to the change, and what made it more telling was the complete silence between them. Two of country music's biggest names, Shania and Vince, never performed together, never shared a stage, and never even appeared side by side at big award shows. In a world where artists often cross paths, that silence was loud. Some people behind the scenes say Vince saw Shania's rise as a turning point. It wasn't just about one artist. It was about a moment when the industry turned its back on its roots. Vince believed country music should have a certain feel, a certain soul. So when Nashville started chasing trends, Vince began pulling away. He wasn't bitter. He just couldn't connect with what the genre had become. And Shania Twain, whether she meant to or not, was at the center of that shift. Her polished sound and global success changed what labels looked for. But to Vince, that success came with a cost, the loss of something pure, something grounded, something real. While the world cheered for the new queen of country pop, Vince stood still. He stayed loyal to the music he loved, even when it meant standing alone. To him, the genre had gone off track, and Shania's path was the start of that journey. Whether through his words or his silence, Vince made one thing clear: he couldn't bear the sound of what country music had become. And Shania, for all her fame, represented everything he feared it was turning into. This brings us to the next artist on the list. Number 5. Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks and Vince Gill are two giant names in country music. Both have shaped the genre in huge ways, but behind the scenes, tension went on between them, a quiet clash that many noticed if they looked closely. Vince Gill was the craftsman. He was the quiet poet who spent hours making every note perfect, rewriting lyrics until they felt true. His music was gentle, filled with feeling and honesty. Vince loved the roots of country, the stories that touched the heart. To him, country music was about soul. Garth Brooks, on the other hand, was the game changer. He brought pyrotechnics, headset microphones, and a giant stage presence that turned country concerts into rock shows. His performances were loud and flashy, filled with energy that packed arenas. To some, including Vince, this felt like something sacred was being stepped on. Vince saw Garth as someone who changed the game, but maybe not for the better. It wasn't just about the shows. It was about what each believed country music should be. Vince valued quiet emotion, soft melodies, and stories told with care. Garth loved big moments, showmanship, and drawing huge crowds. Where Vince whispered heartbreak, Garth roared it. Vince was a protector of the country's roots. Garth was the architect of its commercial explosion. In interviews, Vince once said he felt country music was losing its stories to people bringing in showmanship. He never named Garth directly, but people knew who he meant. Garth Brooks rewrote the rules and changed the whole path of country music. He sold out stadiums and won many awards. Many fans felt the soul of country music was fading. Vince, with his gentle ballads and perfect guitar solos, was quietly pushed out of the spotlight. People say Vince was polite in public, but deeply sad inside. He reportedly turned down chances to give Garth Lifetime Achievement Awards, not because he was bitter, but because he could not fake respect he didn't feel. It was more than a difference in style. It was a battle of ideas. Vince believed country music should be humble, honest, and rooted in tradition. Garth's era was about big shows and crowd excitement, where those old values seemed lost. Was it jealousy or heartbreak? Maybe it was a bit of both. Watching the music you love change into something unfamiliar is hard. Vince never cheered when Garth won. It wasn't about ego. It was about protecting what country music meant to him. This quiet divide between Vince Gill and Garth Brooks shows how music is more than sound. It's about heart and soul, about what people believe music should be. Vince's sadness was the sadness of watching a beloved tradition change beyond recognition. And for many fans who love real country stories, his story is a reminder that sometimes not every change is welcome. Number 6. Kanye West.
I own this thing now. I own this business. I'm the greatest artist that's ever been. Everybody's just going, oh my God. And he says, and I'm going to win the big award later.
Kanye West is one of the most talked about artists in the world. Known for his bold statements, flashy style, and unforgettable performances, Kanye has made a huge mark on music. From his hit albums like The College Dropout, Graduation, and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, he's been praised as a genius by some and criticized as a troublemaker by others. He's broken records, started trends, and turned every stage into his spotlight. But while millions cheered, there was one person who remained unimpressed: country music legend Vince Gill. And if there's one artist Vince could never stomach, it might just be Kanye. Vince Gill, over the years, has made comments that painted a clear picture. In an interview, Vince said, "I see young artists walk into a room and expect the world to bow. Back in my day, you earned respect by listening first." It wasn't just an old-school jab. That interview came out the same month Kanye stood on a stage and boldly declared himself the greatest artist of all time. The timing wasn't random, and fans didn't need a map to connect the dots. Vince was talking about ego, and in his mind, Kanye was the biggest in the game. To Vince, music has always been something sacred. He believes it should come from the soul, not from a craving for attention. While Kanye was out there storming stages, interrupting award speeches, and calling himself a god, Vince was quietly playing his guitar, writing heartfelt songs, and showing up early to rehearsals. It wasn't just about style, it was about what music should stand for. For Vince, that meant honesty, humility, and respect for the craft. Kanye, on the other hand, seemed to Vince like a walking fireworks show, loud, bright, and all about himself.
I'm sitting there with the Foo Fighters, and we kind of looked at each other and go, "Well, thanks a lot," you know. So, right after his big tirade,
Vince never needed to shout his opinions. He preferred to let his actions speak louder. But if someone looked closely, they could see the quiet judgment. When the music world celebrated Kanye's wild behavior as genius or authentic, Vince rolled his eyes. He couldn't understand how someone who often made headlines for controversy could be lifted as a role model. To Vince, it was backwards. He believed that real greatness came from years of hard work, not from grabbing a mic and shouting the loudest. One thing that always set Vince apart was his belief in dignity. He thought an artist should carry themselves with grace, even under pressure. He once said that fame should never come before the music. So when Kanye would take over an entire night with a speech, a stunt, or a meltdown, Vince saw it as disrespectful, not just to other artists, but to the audience. While some people saw Kanye as brave or fearless, Vince saw chaos. He didn't want to be part of a world that rewarded tantrums over talent.
And Ringo handed me this Grammy, and I said, I just got a Grammy handed to me by a Beatle. I looked down and I said, "Hey, Kanye, have you had that happen to you yet?"
What made things even harder for Vince was the way people started to copy Kanye's style. He watched as young musicians stopped focusing on their instruments and started focusing on their image. The music industry, in Vince's eyes, was turning into a circus, and Kanye was the ringmaster. What he couldn't stand was what Kanye symbolized, a shift from meaning to noise, from story to attention-seeking. Despite never working together, the divide between the two artists was clear. Vince stood for quiet strength. Kanye thrived on loud statements. Vince believed in tradition. Kanye was a rule breaker. They were never going to see eye to eye because they weren't even looking in the same direction. The silence, the timing of his words, and the sigh in his voice said enough. In the end, it wasn't about music style, it wasn't even about fame, it was about values. Vince Gill believed music was a gift to be shared humbly. Kanye West, in Vince's mind, had turned that gift into a spotlight just for himself. And that, more than anything else, was why Vince could never stand him. This brings us to the last artist on the list. Number 7, Billy Ray Cyrus. Billy Ray Cyrus exploded onto the country music scene with Achy Breaky Heart, a song that became an overnight phenomenon. It was everywhere, on radios, at dance halls, even in living rooms where people tried out the line dance that came with it. It was catchy, simple, and unforgettable. The song turned Billy Ray into a household name. And suddenly country music wasn't just on the charts, it was in pop culture. Jill, a quiet perfectionist with a background in jazz and traditional country, reportedly saw Achy Breaky Heart as a problem, not a triumph. To him, it wasn't a song, it was a jingle. While others praised its success, Vince saw it as an insult to everything real musicians worked for. At a CMA event inside a green room full of stars and publicists, Gill was overheard joking that the song set country music back 10 years. That one line spread like wildfire through Nashville's music circles. It wasn't just a throwaway comment. Vince believed that music had to come from truth, stories about pain, love, loss, and redemption. To him, country music wasn't supposed to be built on one-line hooks and catchy choruses. But Billy Ray didn't seem interested in telling stories. He had flash, swagger, and a marketing machine that pushed substance aside. In interviews, Vince never attacked Billy Ray by name. But in private, he didn't hide his opinion either. "It's not country," he was once quoted as saying. "It's karaoke with a mullet." The contrast between the two men was striking. Vince was careful and grounded, every lyric crafted, every note respected. Billy Ray leaned into the spotlight with flashy hair and a style built more for TV than for the Grand Ole Opry. To Vince, it felt like the genre he loved was being sold off piece by piece. Fans started chasing trends instead of depth, and Gill felt like the heart of country music was being drowned out by noise. They never worked together, never shared a stage. And if they did cross paths at industry events, insiders said the atmosphere turned cold, not troubling but heavy with silence. Vince wasn't one to start drama, but he also wasn't going to pretend. What Billy Ray had done in his eyes was push country music away from its roots, and that was something Vince could never get behind. Cyrus's rise also marked a turning point in Nashville. Labels realized they could chase a broader market by blending country with pop and packaging it like a spectacle. Songs started to look more like products. And for traditionalists like Vince, it was heartbreaking. The music that once came from back porches and dusty roads was now coming from choreographers and marketing teams. Billy Ray wasn't the only one doing it, but he was the one who opened the floodgates. Still, Vince didn't need to fight. What hurt him was watching something he loved be transformed into something he no longer recognized. For Gill, Billy Ray Cyrus didn't just represent a song, he represented a shift. A moment when country music stopped being about roots and started chasing flash. That shift never sat right with Vince Gill. At 68, Vince Gill finally spoke up. After many years in country music, he named the 7 artists he could never stand. To him, they changed the music in the wrong way. It wasn't just about style, it was about values. For Vince, this wasn't drama, it was honesty, and he meant every word. Which name on his list do you agree with the most? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.